What kind of joke ruins a marriage in a single sentence? I thought I was being funny, just teasing like everyone else. But when my husband left our own wedding reception in silence, I realized the line between humor and humiliation was thinner than I'd ever imagined. What happens when laughter becomes the final straw? I'm Marla Vane, 32, and people still say my wedding speech was unforgettable. They don't mean it kindly. I used to think humor could fix anything, that if people laughed, it meant things were fine. So when I stood up at our reception, a little drunk holding the mic, I made a joke about my husband's size. It was supposed to be funny, light, the kind of teasing that showed closeness. Everyone laughed, except Daniel. He didn't even look at me. He just put his glass down, stood up, and walked out in front of everyone. At first, I thought he needed air, that he'd come back once people stopped whispering, but he didn't. And when I tried to laugh it off, pretending he was being dramatic, no one joined in. The silence that followed was louder than the music. Now, when people mention that night, they always lower their voices, like talking about a funeral. Maybe they're right. Maybe something did die that night. And maybe it was my own joke that killed it. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The night of the wedding should have been perfect. The hall was golden and loud, full of clinking glasses and half-finished laughter. I'd spent months planning every detail, the flowers, the playlist, the menu. Everyone said I had a gift for making things memorable. I liked hearing that. I liked being the one people looked at. And when the time came for my toast, I wanted to make sure they kept looking. Tara handed me the microphone, grinning, already tipsy. She whispered, "Make it good," and I promised I would. The champagne had warmed me, made everything brighter, easier. I thanked everyone for coming, talked about love, about partnership. People smiled, their faces glowing in the soft light. Then, too quickly, I slipped into the joke. I said something like, "Daniel may not be the biggest man in the room, but he knows how to make things last." It was meant to be clever, teasing. There was laughter, quick, sharp, nervous. I heard a few gasps. Daniel's smile froze, then vanished. I tried to keep going, to pretend it hadn't landed wrong. But when I looked at him, he wasn't there. He had set down his glass, adjusted his tie, and walked out. No words, no glance back, just the sound of his shoes across the floor and the door swinging shut. For a second, everyone kept laughing, thinking it was part of the joke. Then they realized it wasn't. The music faltered. Tara whispered, "He'll be fine." I laughed too loudly, pretending nothing had happened. I raised my glass again and said something about love being full of surprises. It sounded pathetic even to me. I finished the toast quickly and slipped outside after him. He was on the hotel balcony, facing the parking lot, the night wind flattening his shirt against his back. I tried to sound light. I said, "You're not seriously upset over that, are you?" He didn't answer. I walked closer, heels tapping on the tile, and said, "Everyone knew it was a joke." He finally turned around. His face was calm, too calm. He said, "You made me small in front of everyone we know." I told him he was overreacting. He said, "You turned me into a punchline." I said, "It's called humor." He said, "No, it's called humiliation." He walked past me, back inside. I stood there staring at the city lights, wondering how a single sentence could make the air feel heavier. When I went back into the ballroom, people avoided my eyes. Elaine, his mother, looked pale and tight-lipped. Tara tried to smile, but even she seemed uneasy. I told everyone Daniel just needed air. A few guests laughed softly, but the tension was obvious. When the music started again, it felt forced. By the time the party ended, Daniel still hadn't come back. I found him in the hotel room, sitting on the edge of the bed, his tie undone. I said, "You can't actually be angry." He said, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. That word stung. I told him he was being dramatic. He said, I wanted this night to be ours, not yours. He got up, walked into the bathroom, and closed the door. I sat on the bed, still holding the champagne glass from earlier, feeling like I'd been excluded from my own celebration. I told myself he'd get over it in the morning. When he came out, he didn't look at me. He said quietly, You think respect is something you can joke about? I said, It's how I show affection. He said, Then I guess we love differently. He lay down, back turned, and I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, trying to believe that this was still just a misunderstanding. The next morning, he was gone when I woke up. I found a note on the dresser that said, Needed to clear my head. I called Tara. She said, He'll calm down. I asked if people were still talking about the toast. She hesitated before saying, Only a little. That little sounded enormous. I went downstairs for breakfast. People from the wedding were there, smiling awkwardly. One man from Daniel's office gave me a thumbs up and said, Funny speech. I laughed too loudly again, pretending not to notice his wife glaring at him. When Daniel came back later that day, we were packing to leave for the honeymoon. He didn't say much. I tried to joke my way back into normalcy. On the plane, I said, At least we're starting married life with a story to tell. He said, It's not a story I'll be telling. I said, So you'll just sulk forever? He said, I'm thinking about what kind of person finds it funny to mock the person they claim to love. I told him he was twisting things. He said, No, I'm straightening them. I stopped talking for the rest of the flight. During the honeymoon, he kept his distance. He took photos of landscapes, not of us. When I tried to hold his hand, he pulled away gently. I told myself he was still hurt, but he'd move on. I posted a few pictures of myself smiling by the beach, tagging him with heart emojis. He didn't like or comment on any of them. When we got home, the first few weeks felt normal enough. We went back to work, fell into routines. But the silence between us didn't fade. At dinners, he ate quickly, then disappeared into his office. At night, he lay on the far edge of the bed. I started filling the quiet with chatter, stories, jokes, anything to make him react. He barely did. One evening, I hosted a small dinner for friends, hoping to show that everything was fine. Tara came, along with a few co-workers, and Daniel's brother, Josh. Someone brought up the wedding. Tara said, That speech, though. Everyone laughed, glancing at Daniel. He didn't smile. I jumped in, saying, Come on, it was just a joke. Daniel stood up, cleared the dishes, and left the table. The laughter stopped. Tara muttered, He really can't take it. When he came back, his face was blank. He said, I'll be upstairs. I said, Daniel, people are here. He said, They can stay. I don't need to be. He went upstairs, and the silence that followed felt like a wall closing in. After everyone left, I went to his office. He was typing something, his expression calm. I said, You embarrassed me tonight. He said, I'm just returning the favor. I told him he was being cruel. He said, Cruel would be laughing while someone breaks. I stood there, trying to think of something to say, but nothing sounded right. I wanted him to forgive me, but I didn't want to admit I'd done something wrong. I said, You're making this into a bigger deal than it is. He said, It was already big enough for everyone to hear. I noticed a calendar open on his desk. One entry near the bottom read, Downtown, 09:35. I asked what it was. He said, Work stuff. His voice was flat. I told him not to act mysterious. He said, You never liked what you couldn't control. That night, I lay awake listening to the faint tapping of his keyboard. Every sound felt like distance growing between us. I told myself this was just marriage adjusting, that all couples hit rough patches. But deep down, I knew something else had started that night on the balcony. Something quiet, methodical, and irreversible. When the tapping stopped, I turned over and looked at him through the darkness. He wasn't looking at me. He just sat there, the glow of the screen lighting his face. Calm, patient, deliberate. I didn't know then that his silence was already a plan in motion. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a door closing. I thought he'd gone to work early. On the counter was a coffee mug, his, half empty. Next to it was a single folded napkin. On it, written neatly, were 3 words, handled properly soon. For the next few days, Daniel barely spoke to me. He moved through the house like someone on autopilot, polite, steady, and unreachable. Every word I said seemed to fall into a void. I told myself he'd get over it. People don't end marriages over a joke. They just don't. At work, everyone had already seen the video. I didn't even know there was a video until one of my co-workers, Erin, sent me a link with a nervous face emoji. I clicked it, and there I was on the screen, smiling too brightly, the microphone in my hand, my voice carrying the joke that now felt like poison. Laughter filled the background, and then Daniel's face, frozen, expressionless, before he stood and walked away. The clip ended there. The comments were brutal. Strangers called me cruel, heartless, embarrassing. Some called him a saint for not reacting. I deleted the video from my phone, but it was already everywhere. Josh had recorded it and posted it that night with the caption, "Married to a comedian, I guess." He probably hadn't meant harm, but it spread fast. When I called him to ask why, he said, "It was funny, Marla. You always say you want people to remember your events." At home, Daniel stayed silent about it, but I noticed small changes. He moved his things into the guest bathroom. He stopped touching me at all, even by accident. He started keeping his phone face down. I asked if we were okay, and he said, "We're fine. We're learning who we are." The way he said "we" sounded like a word already splitting in two. I tried to fix things the only way I knew how, by pretending it wasn't serious. I told him everyone was overreacting, that social media loved drama. He didn't reply. I said I only wanted people to laugh, that making others smile was my way of showing love. He looked at me and said, "You keep calling it love. It never feels like it." Then he went upstairs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through comments under the video until my chest hurt. People joked about our marriage ending before the honeymoon even started. Someone even tagged Daniel's company account. I wrote a long post defending myself, saying the joke was innocent, that my husband knew my humor, that people were being too sensitive. It got shared again, this time with the caption, "No remorse." By morning, Daniel had already seen it. He was making coffee when I came downstairs. I said, "People are twisting things." He said, "No, they're just watching." I told him I was trying to fix it. He said, "You don't fix things by explaining why they weren't broken." He poured his coffee and walked away. Later, I found him in his office, his laptop open, papers spread out neatly. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Sorting things." I said, "You're not leaving me over a joke." He said, "I'm not leaving because of a joke. I'm leaving because you keep calling it one." I felt something tighten in my chest. I told him he was being cruel. He said, "No, I'm being quiet." His calmness frightened me more than shouting ever could. That evening, I tried calling Tara. She didn't answer at first. When she finally picked up, her voice was cautious. She said, "It's getting bad online, Marla." I said, "It's just gossip." She said, "No, it's sympathy for him." I told her people didn't even know us. She said, "They don't need to. They saw what you did." I hung up before she could say more. The next morning, Daniel left early. I saw a note on the fridge. "Don't wait up." I checked his laptop again after he was gone. There was a spreadsheet open, neat rows of text, dates, and names. The header read, "Household Inventory." Another tab was labeled Personal Finances. My hands shook as I closed the screen. Around noon, Josh texted me. He called Mom this morning. Said he's taking a break. I typed back, A break from what? He didn't reply. I felt a rush of anger then. Everyone was treating me like I'd done something monstrous. I went to Daniel's office and deleted the folders he'd left open, as if erasing them could reset everything. Then I called his phone, straight to voicemail. I called again and again. On the third try, it rang once before cutting off. That night, I heard the garage door open. I stood in the hallway waiting, ready to confront him. He came in quietly, set his keys down, and started taking off his jacket. I said, "You can't just disappear." He said, "I can when there's nothing to come back to." I said, "You're being dramatic again." He said, "You should listen to yourself. You sound like someone explaining a car crash by saying it was just loud." He went upstairs and I followed. I said, "We can fix this." He said, "We? You had a room full of people. I had a sentence I'll never unhear." I told him he was exaggerating. He said, "That's your word for everything you break." He went into his office and shut the door. I stood outside, listening to faint typing again. A few minutes later, the printer started. The sound made me jump. I pressed my ear to the door and heard him sigh. Then silence. When he left for work the next morning, I snuck in and checked the printer tray. There was only one sheet, blank except for 3 words in the corner. Downtown 0935. I didn't know what it meant. A meeting? A warning? The handwriting was neat, calm, deliberate, just like him. That evening, when I asked about it, he said, "It's nothing you'd understand." I snapped back, "You can't punish me forever." He said, "You keep saying forever like it's a threat. For me, it's a release." I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't look away from the TV. His silence stretched, solid and final. I went upstairs alone that night, thinking I'd find him gone in the morning. But he was still there, sleeping on his side of the bed, a line of distance carved between us that felt wider than any room. And for the first time, I wondered if the world was right. Maybe I hadn't made a joke. Maybe I'd made a choice. By the weekend, the video had stopped trending, but the silence it left behind felt worse. People had moved on, but Daniel hadn't. His quietness filled the house like fog. He didn't slam doors or raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every small thing he did was deliberate, measured. I started to resent the way he could stay calm while I was unraveling. I told Tara over the phone that I was living with a ghost. She said, "He's not haunting you, Marla. You humiliated him." I said, "It was one joke." She said, "You keep saying that like repetition makes it true." Then she added, softer, "You've always needed an audience." Her words stung. I told her Daniel would come around once people stopped talking. She said, "He's not waiting for the world to forget. He's waiting for you to understand." I hung up, angry and embarrassed. That night, I tried to talk to him again. He was at the kitchen counter, sorting through a pile of envelopes. I asked if we could start over, go to dinner, talk like normal people. He said, "Normal people don't weaponize laughter." I said, "So now I'm your enemy?" He said, "You made me one when you decided I was funny." I tried to laugh it off again, but he didn't even look up. I told him I'd already apologized. He said, "You apologized for being caught, not for being cruel." His voice was steady, almost gentle, and that made it worse. When he went upstairs, I stayed behind, staring at the papers he'd left on the counter. There were printed pages clipped together, lists, figures, a few highlighted sections. At the top, it said, Household Budget Review. It wasn't unusual for him to track finances, but the tone felt different now, like he was sorting a life into categories that no longer included me. On Sunday, I went to lunch with Tara and Josh, hoping to get support. Instead, it turned into another interrogation. Josh said, "You know, he didn't even raise his voice that night." "That's worse." I told him Daniel was being dramatic. Tara said, "He's being done." I said, "He wouldn't throw away 10 years over one bad joke." She said, "You keep saying one bad joke. But that's not what he heard. I paid the bill just to end the conversation. When I got home, Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. I walked through the house, checking every room, half angry, half anxious. On his desk was another folder, labeled Personal Records. Inside were copies of text messages between us, screenshots of my replies to people who'd commented on the video, a few printed photos from our wedding. It looked like he was documenting everything. When I heard his car pull in, I panicked and put the folder back. He came in with groceries, calm as ever. I asked where he'd been. He said, "Downtown." I said, "At 09:35. He didn't answer, just unloaded the bags one by one. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and sat beside him on the couch. I said, "You can't stay mad forever." He said, "I'm not mad." I said, "Then what are you?" He said, "Prepared." I laughed, but my voice cracked. The next morning, I woke up to find him already gone. His side of the bed was made perfectly. On the dresser was a small pile of items: his watch, his wedding ring, and a single key. My heart dropped. I grabbed my phone, called him, no answer. By noon, I drove to his office, pretending I needed to drop off a document. The receptionist looked uncomfortable when I asked for him. She said he was out. I asked where. She said he mentioned a meeting downtown. I pressed her for details, but she avoided my eyes. "Sorry, Mrs. Vane," she said. He didn't say more. I sat in the parking lot for half an hour, watching people come and go. Every time the door opened, I expected him to appear, but he didn't. When I got home, there was an email waiting for me. The subject line read, "Important, Review." I opened it and saw a shared document titled Personal Boundaries Agreement, Draft. My chest tightened. The first line said, "To ensure mutual respect and independence during the separation process." Separation. I slammed the laptop shut. I called Tara again. She said, "Marla, he warned you." I said, "He's bluffing." She said, "He's methodical. He doesn't bluff." That night when he came home, I confronted him. I said, "What is this about a separation?" He said, "It's about peace." I said, "Peace doesn't come with paperwork." He said, "It does when you live with chaos." He walked past me into his office, shutting the door quietly. I followed and said through the wood, "You're making a mistake." He said, "No, I made one. I believed we were a team." I pressed my forehead against the door, whispering that I was sorry, that I hadn't meant to hurt him. He said, "You keep saying that to yourself. I don't think you even know what you mean." Then I heard it again. The printer. Slow, steady. I waited until it stopped, then opened the door. The paper tray held a single page. It said only, "Downtown 09:35, Final Review." I stared at it, unable to move. When I turned, he was standing behind me. His expression was calm, unreadable. He said, "I'm doing this properly." I asked, "Doing what?" He said, "What you made necessary." He walked past me again, and this time I didn't follow. I just stood there, staring at the paper until the ink blurred in my eyes. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the faint sound of rain against the window. Each drop sounded like something counting down, and in the silence, I realized what he'd meant by prepared. He wasn't leaving impulsively. He was building his exit one document at a time. The next morning, the house was unbearably still. The coffee pot was clean and dry. He hadn't made any. I wandered through the kitchen barefoot, feeling the echo of an empty routine. On the counter sat an envelope, blank except for my name written in his careful handwriting. I tore it open. Inside were copies of financial statements, a list of household items, and a note that said only, "Transparency matters now." I laughed out loud because it felt absurd. Who leaves spreadsheets when they stop loving you? But underneath the laughter, I felt something sharp, fear disguised as irritation. I told myself he was trying to scare me, to make me beg. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Later that afternoon, Elaine called. Her voice was cool, polite. She said, "Daniel told me you two need space." I said, "He's overreacting." She said, "He's correcting." I told her she was only hearing one side. She said, "I saw the video, Marla. The whole world did. Sometimes one side is enough." After the call, I sat at the dining table staring at nothing. My phone buzzed again, a text from Tara. "Lunch today? We need to talk." At the restaurant, she looked different, tired, cautious. She said, "People at work are whispering about Daniel." I said, "What now?" She said, "They think he's meeting lawyers." I forced a laugh. "That's ridiculous." She didn't smile. "He's calmer than I've ever seen him. That's not good for you." I told her he wouldn't dare embarrass himself by making things public. She said, "He doesn't need to embarrass you. You already did that yourself." I told her she sounded like everyone else. She sighed and said, "I'm just saying, he's not angry anymore, and that's when men act." When I got home, his car was gone again. I checked his office. Empty, clean, organized. The folders were still there, now in neat stacks labeled records, accounts, and communication. I opened one. It contained printed copies of our text messages, highlighted in yellow where I'd joked or deflected. On one page, I'd written, "You're so sensitive, lighten up." Next to it, in his handwriting, he'd written, "Repeated pattern, dismissive response." I slammed the folder shut, whispering, "Unbelievable." He wasn't just leaving me, he was building a case. That evening, I poured a drink and sat on the balcony, watching cars pass below. Every sound felt amplified, the clink of ice in the glass, the hum of traffic, the smallness of my own breathing. I told myself he was bluffing, that all this organization was just a performance to make me sweat. He loved control, and this was his version of revenge. At sunset, his car finally pulled into the driveway. I waited by the door, determined to end the silence. When he came in, I said, "We need to talk like adults." He said, "We've already done that. You just laughed." I said, "I've said I'm sorry." He said, "You've said it without meaning it." I snapped, "You're not perfect either." He said, "The difference is I don't confuse cruelty with honesty." He walked past me and headed upstairs. I followed, still talking. "So what now? You're going to pretend the whole marriage was a mistake?" He stopped halfway up the stairs and said quietly, "You already made it a performance. I'm just closing the curtain." Then he disappeared into his office, locking the door behind him. I sat on the stairs for a long time, holding my glass, listening to the faint sounds of him moving papers. Eventually, I heard a soft whirring. The printer again. That sound had become my heartbeat. When he came out later, I tried again. I said, "Daniel, you can't just destroy us over this." He said, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm documenting it." I said, "You're cold." He said, "No, I'm finished." He brushed past me and went to bed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about what Tara said. That calm meant action. Around 2 a.m, I got up and crept into his office again. The top drawer was locked now. I pulled, tugged, but it wouldn't open. I rifled through the papers left on the desk and found one half-printed document face down. I flipped it over. The heading read, "Notice of Filing Intent." I froze. There were blank lines where names would go. The printer light blinked faintly. Waiting. My hand shook as I pressed the power button off. I couldn't let him finish it. Not yet. Not like this. I gathered the papers and shoved them into the drawer, as if hiding them could undo what he'd started. The next morning, he found me in the kitchen. His voice was calm, almost kind. "Don't touch my things again." I said, "You're giving up too easily." He said, "You call it easy because you never built anything worth losing." I said, "You're not leaving me." He said, "I already did. You just haven't read it yet." He took his coffee and left. The front door closed quietly behind him. I stood there, my pulse racing, waiting for the sound of his car starting. Instead, my phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. It read, "Confirm delivery for 09:35 tomorrow." I dropped the phone, my stomach twisting. Delivery. That word repeated in my head. I ran to the window. His car was gone again, the street empty. The house felt colder. I looked at the clock, 8:42. The day had barely started, and I already felt like it was over. The printer clicked once, softly, like it was remembering something it still had to do. The next morning started too quietly. Even the refrigerator hum felt louder than usual. I made coffee, pretending the world hadn't shifted, but I couldn't stop staring at the counter where he'd left those documents. Everything about Daniel had become deliberate. Each word, each silence, each space he left between us. By 9, I decided to go to his office. I told myself I'd catch him before this mysterious delivery happened, that if he saw my face, he'd remember what we had. I put on makeup too carefully, chose a dress he used to like, and rehearsed my lines in the mirror. "You're overreacting, Daniel. Let's just start over." The drive downtown felt endless. My heart thudded in rhythm with the windshield wipers. When I arrived, the receptionist gave me a look I couldn't read. "He's in a meeting," she said softly. I said, "I'll wait." She hesitated. "It's a closed meeting." I sat anyway, pretending to scroll on my phone. Half an hour later, he came out of the glass conference room, straight-backed, composed. He froze when he saw me. I stood quickly, tried to smile. "We need to talk." His expression didn't change. He said, "Not here." I followed him outside. On the sidewalk, he said, "You shouldn't be here." I said, "I had to see you. We can fix this." He said, "There's nothing left to fix." I said, "You're just angry." He said, "No, I'm organized." That word cut deeper than any insult. He turned away, started walking. I followed again, almost pleading. "Daniel, please, we can talk at home. I'll delete everything. I'll make it right." He stopped and said, "You can't delete the way you laughed while you humiliated me." Then he walked toward his car and didn't look back. I stood there, people brushing past, the city roaring around me. My reflection in the office windows looked like someone I didn't recognize. Someone smaller. When I got home, I poured myself another drink, even though it was barely noon. The phone rang. It was Tara. She asked, "Where are you?" I said, "Trying to stop him." She sighed. "You can't. He's already made up his mind." I said, "He'll calm down." She said, "Marla, calm isn't his problem. It's yours." After I hung up, I noticed something strange. The spare room door was open. Daniel had moved his suitcases inside, but they were empty now. The closet was half bare. His laptop was gone. On the nightstand was a single sticky note. "Don't worry about tomorrow." That phrase sent a chill through me. I wanted to tear it up, but I couldn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the note, whispering, "He's bluffing." That evening, his sister Elaine called. Her voice was low, careful. She said, "He told me not to take sides, but I think you should know. He's been getting everything in order." I said, "He's manipulating you." She said, "He doesn't need to. You did that for him." I almost hung up, but then she added, "He said he'll handle it properly." That word again, properly. It sounded final, like a judge's verdict. I asked what she meant, but she said she didn't know, only that his tone scared her. He was calm, she said. Too calm. That night, he didn't come home. I waited up, the house dark except for the kitchen light. I stared at my phone, willing it to buzz, to ring, to give me some sign he still cared enough to fight. Nothing came. Around midnight, I opened my laptop and searched his name in my email. Old messages, photos, wedding invitations, all digital ghosts. Then one new message appeared at the top of the inbox, time-stamped just 10 minutes earlier. The subject line said, "For the record." My chest tightened. The body of the email was short. Marla, I'm done arguing. Tomorrow you'll understand. I'm not angry, I'm just finished. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I typed a reply. Daniel, please don't do this. But before I could hit send, a small red notification appeared. Message failed to deliver. He'd blocked me. I sat there until dawn, the room faintly glowing with the first light. The coffee machine clicked on by itself, still set to his schedule. I poured a cup, not tasting it. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number again. The message read, reminder, meeting confirmed for 09:35, downtown office tower lobby. My throat closed. I whispered, no, as if saying it could stop the clock. At 9:30, I was still pacing the kitchen, the note from the nightstand clenched in my hand. I wanted to drive there, to stand in front of him, to force him to look at me. But another part of me knew it was too late. Everything about Daniel had become exact, intentional. Whatever 09:35 meant, it was already set in motion. At 10 high, I sat on the stairs, shaking. I thought of the wedding, the laughter, the way he'd walked out without slamming the door. The sound of that quiet exit echoed louder now than it had that night. By 10:12, I heard a car door close outside. For a second, hope flickered. Maybe he'd come back. Maybe he wanted to talk after all. I ran to the window, heart hammering. It wasn't him. Just a delivery driver walking toward the porch, holding a thick envelope. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching through the glass as the man slipped the envelope through the mail slot, checked something on his clipboard, and walked away. The sound of the envelope hitting the floor was soft, final, like the end of an echo. The clock on the wall ticked to 09:35. The envelope lay on the floor, heavy as if it already knew what it contained. I stared at it for a long time before bending down to pick it up. My hand shook as I broke the seal. Inside were several neatly printed pages, his handwriting on the first one, short and precise. This is the proper way. Beneath it, the heading hit me like a slap. Petition for dissolution of marriage with temporary orders. My name was printed beside his, separated by a thin black line. I sank onto the floor, the words blurring. He had actually done it. All those quiet nights, those folders, the printer, none of it was a threat. It was preparation. Outside, I heard a car door close. I ran to the window. He was there, standing by the curb, speaking calmly to the courier. He didn't look up at me, didn't wave. He just nodded, turned, and got into his car. I pressed my hand against the glass, whispering his name. He drove away without once looking back. The papers trembled in my lap, the clock ticking behind me, steady and cruel. For the first time, there was no sound left to fill the silence I'd created. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.